guys, welcome back to this channel. I know it's been a long time since I filmed for this channel. Not because I didn't want to, I've just been kind of busy and things like that, but I do want to jump back on here and start filming for this channel again. I love this channel and I love just talking about books and stuff. But today I wanted to talk about books that I actually DNF'd. Now the reason I wanted to do this video is because I find that I've never talked about a lot of books that I've DNF'd, because I just never finish them, and so I just never talk about them, I guess. Like, usually I'll just click them off of like what I'm currently reading and then I never talk about them again. And I'm not a huge DNF'er, to be honest. Like, I have a really hard time DNFing books, especially when I get pretty far into them. Once I'm like halfway through a book, I like refuse to DNF it. I get really stubborn. But a lot of times if I am reading a book and like the first chapter or so is just not hitting right, or I can really tell that it's just not a book that I'm going to be interested in, it's extremely easy for me to DNF usually, because I can just tell that I don't want to like spend the next week reading this book that I'm not even going to like. So, and then there's other situations where I'll be reading a book, I'll be like halfway through, and I really have a full intention of finishing the book, but I'm not enjoying it like as much as I think I'm enjoying it, and so like I'll start another book while I'm reading that other book, and I'll just start reading the other book instead, and then the other one will just kind of sit unread and it turns into a DNF, and I just realized like I must not have been as into it as I thought I was if I never wanted to pick it back up again. And that's happened to me a few times as well. I know some of these books are really popular in the book community, especially one series that I think I'm gonna get some hate for. So let me open my Goodreads. I have a DNF shelf. So on my Goodreads I only have 8 that I did not finish, but I have more than 8 that I haven't finished, because I don't put all of them on here. It's just if I think about it, I do. So this one I donated already. I picked this up because I heard really good things about it, but I never really knew what it was about. It was one of those situations where you're like, oh, like so many people talk great about this, but I literally don't know what it's about. And this is called Exit West by Mohsin Hamid. And this was just not what I was expecting. I thought this was going to be more of like a sci-fi, kind of like magical type of situation, maybe something similar to like Dark Matter or something, to where like just weird crazy sci-fi stuff happens. But this is more of like a, I feel like, well, I didn't read a ton of it, if I'm being honest. I stopped pretty early on because I just was not connecting to this at all. But I kind of feel like this was more of like a social commentary type of thing, and I just wasn't really prepared for that. I think I was in the mood for like a really heavy sci-fi type of thing, and this just didn't hit what I was looking for at the time. And so I literally DNF'd it probably after like a chapter and a half, and I was like, this is just not for me. And I think it was because I was so detached from it while I was reading it, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so boring already, like I can't handle this, that I just completely like removed that book from my mind and what it was even about and what I even read. Like, it was so boring to me, and I was like, ugh, like this might get better, this might get good, but I really don't have it in me to continue on to find out. And so I just shut it and moved it to the side, and it was one of those books that I knew very early on was not going to be for me. The next is a book that is going to be an unpopular opinion, and this is one that I know so many people love. Now let me say, I think I could like this. I think if I would have pushed through and got through the first book and continued on with the rest of the series, I think I probably could have liked this, if I'm being honest. And I think it's something that it would have grown on me, I would have gotten to know the characters, and I probably would have liked it. But there was just a part of me that couldn't, and I don't know why. And it's The Raven Boys. Now, this book series was okay. I kind of liked where it was going. It kind of reminded me maybe of like The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, like that group of boys. And it was cool in that regard, but there was something that was disconnecting me from the characters, and I'm not sure what it was. It's almost like she wasn't describing the characters well enough for me, and I couldn't attach myself to the characters. I was very confused with like who was who and what their place was in the story. Like, I couldn't figure out who each character was individually. Does that make sense? Like, all kind of were muddled together for me, and I didn't know how to like separate them all in my head. But if I'm being honest, I don't think I'm a big fan of Maggie Stiefvater's writing. I think that there was aspects of her writing that really irked me. And one thing I remember very clearly from this book, and this is something that really irks me in certain writing styles, and I don't know if other people have noticed this, but this is something that I cannot stand, and I notice it with certain writers, Maggie Stiefvater being one of them. They will be in the middle of like a dialogue, right, where they're like talking to each other, and then one person will ask a question, and then the person that's going to answer the question, there'll be like this long paragraph of just description. Like, they'll say, well, what's your favorite color? And then it'll be like, then she looked to the window and looked outside. The light was shining down on the flowers and she was thinking about all the little, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. And then she answers the question and you're like, wait, what was the original question? Because there was so much description between the question and the answer that you can't remember what they were even talking about. I hate that, and that happened to me a million times in this book where I was like, wait, I don't even remember what the question was. I don't remember what he asked her or what they were talking about. And it drove me insane, and it happened multiple times in this book, and I just remember getting frustrated with that. And I think that that was the first book that I ever noticed that issue. I just didn't continue it, and this was one of those situations where I had full intention of finishing it, but then I ended up picking up another book while I was reading that one, and I just never picked The Raven Boys back up. Even though I intended to do it, I just never did, and it just went unread forever, and I was just like, well, I guess it's not for me, and so I just moved on from it. But so the next one was a book that I actually DNF'd this year, and this was the very first book that I picked up this year. And I have like this really weird thing where I have to start my year off with a 5-star read. Like, I have to read a book that's a 5-star read. And I thought that this book was going to be a 5-star read because I had heard so many good things about it, and I was like, this is going to be it. Like, I'm excited. And it is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal E. Mohtar. But this book, you've probably heard of it, and you've probably heard really, really good things about it. Now, this book was so confusing to me. I had no idea what was going on. I was so lost. And they do kind of warn you going into this book that you're going to kind of feel that way, but just like push through and like it'll all make sense. But I was so lost and so confused, I like couldn't even push through. I was like, what is going on? I have no idea what is happening right now. Like, I felt like I needed to watch a video on this book before I read it or something. Like, it was that confusing. Now, the writing style, it's this certain type of writing style that I'm not a huge fan of. It's kind of like really beautiful, very poetic writing, like very flowery, like beautiful writing. Like, I'm not gonna lie, this person can write, and he can write very, very well, but I feel like sometimes, even though they're not being pretentious in their writing, it comes across as sort of pretentious. Like, it comes across as really, really, really over the top. But even with that said, I can say that this person is a talented writer. The way that he can use words in such an artful way takes so much skill, and he has every right to be pretentious. But it's just not my type of writing style because it's just so much. It's just so flowery, and I just didn't really like the writing style, and it was just hard for me to read. And I ended up DNFing this probably a few chapters in. I was like, I have no idea what's going on. I do not care what's going on, and I closed it and never turned back. So let me know if you guys tried to read this book and if you ended up liking it, if you felt like the same way as me about it at first, but you kind of pushed through anyways. I'd be very curious to hear your guys' thoughts. So the next book that I DNF'd was actually another book this year, and that's saying a lot because 2 books in 1 year, especially this early on, is pretty rare for me. I don't DNF often, but I was so excited for this book. I was so like eager to read this. I thought it was going to be a book that I was going to love. It's an adult fantasy, kind of like a standalone, which I absolutely love as well, with like a romance. I was like, this is going to be like totally up my alley. And it is G.A. Aiken's The Blacksmith Queen. I was so excited to jump into this. I thought I was going to love it, but it has this certain type of trope that I just really don't like. Some people love it. Some people find it very like cool and empowering, and they just really, really like it. I personally can't stand it. It is a huge pet peeve for me, and it is the overly powerful female character. Now, don't get me wrong. I love a good strong female character. I love a good character that's like very independent and strong and smart and, you know, can take care of themselves. I love a good independent character. But I don't like it when female characters are portrayed as like unrealistically strong or powerful, when they don't have magic powers. So at the very beginning of this book, the girl, she was often talked about as having like really strong shoulders, which great, strong shoulders, like really buff. But at the beginning of this book, she literally takes on like 10 warrior men that have been training their entire lives, probably 250-pound men. 10 of them, she takes them on with a hammer and wins. I'm sorry, what? Like, one guy could literally grab onto her and another guy could stab her in the neck. Like, you can't do that. And don't get me wrong, halfway through the fight, like, some other people like joined in and like helped her win or whatever, but it's kind of like when Batman and Superman are fighting each other, as if there's any competition there whatsoever. Like, you're telling me that a man that can literally like move the planet is fighting Batman and it's a competition? Like, literally Superman could like break him in half like in 2 seconds. Like, at least make it realistic, you know? At least make it realistic. At least give the girl a sword. At least make her really like good at wielding swords or something. And I also found too that a lot of the males in this book were kind of portrayed as like weaker, and all the women were like super duper powerful. And I don't like that dynamic. Some people might really like that dynamic, but for me, I personally don't like it, and this definitely had that kind of dynamic in it, which I didn't really love. And I just found myself rolling my eyes a lot through this story. So the next book I DNF'd was a book that was also highly praised and talked about a lot. I thought I was gonna love this, and it's still talked about quite a bit, I feel like, especially around Christmas time. And so many people rave about this book. And I think if I would have finished this book, this is another one of those books where if I would have just pushed through, I probably could have liked it at least a little bit, but I just couldn't push through, and I don't know why. And it's the book The Afterlife of Holly Chase by Cynthia Hand. This is a retelling of A Christmas Carol. Is that what it's called? First of all, I don't know that story, so I don't have any attachment to that story anyways. But for some reason, I could not connect myself to this story. I couldn't connect myself to the main character. I remember her bugging me a lot in this. Like, she just kind of bothered me. Her just extreme negativity just kind of got under my skin a little bit, and I don't like overly negative characters, I've come to realize. Like, when characters are too negative and they're too expressive with their negativity, I don't like that in people. Like, I just find it to be extremely, like, vibe killing. Like, don't get me wrong, people can be down, people can be sad, people can be depressed, and they can voice it and talk about it with you and stuff like that. But when it's constant and it's like this permanent rain cloud over your relationship all the time, and it's all they want to talk about, and they're just extremely negative people, I just don't like it. I find it to be kind of rude. I find it to be a little bit toxic, and it's just not a character trait that I tend to like in my characters that I read about. And I think that's part of the reason why I couldn't connect to the story and connect to the character, is because I just don't like that extreme negativity. That was kind of my deal with this book, and I just remember not really being able to get into the story. I was kind of bored in it, and I just wasn't into it. So let me know if anybody else didn't like this book, because I know it's extremely popular. So the next book that I DNF'd this one a long time ago, The Happiness Project, and this was by Gretchen Rubin. This is a really popular book, I feel like. Like, you kind of see this around, like, popping up here and there, you know? And I remember reading this book because somebody said it was really good, and I started reading it, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you can't be serious. Like, this girl decides to write a book about her happiness project, and what she does is she decides to like do all these things to like make herself happy, like clean out her closet. This is like a nonfiction, you know, whatever. Okay, hear me out for a second. This chick is like one of those girls, or one of those people, I should say, who are so unaware of their privilege that it's like cringy. You know, the way in which this book was presented, it came across as like this extremely privileged human being that was so unaware of like the realities of the world. Like, I feel like if anybody who read this book that had an actual like really difficult, hard life, they would just read this and be like, oh man, like, read The Room. That's kind of how I feel like this book came across. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying you can't be sad even though you have a really great life. Like, you 100% can be. You can be depressed even though you have all the money in the world. Like, I'm totally aware of that situation, but just the way that this book was presented just came across as just sort of like tone deaf, sort of, or like, I don't know. I think you get my point. So the next book that I want to talk about was Dry by Neal Shusterman and Jared Shusterman. Now, the reason why I've actually kept this book is because I want to try reading it again. So I've heard it's actually really good. This is about California running out of water and kind of how people survive, or would survive, if, you know, there was actually like a full-on drought where there was no water left. And I started reading this book, and for some reason, I don't know what it was, I could not connect to the main character. I couldn't connect to her. And I really don't have a reason why. Sometimes I think that you can connect or disconnect to a character based on how you're picturing them in your mind, at least for me. And for some reason, this character, the way I was picturing her, the way I was picturing her personality and just how she was, I couldn't connect to her. I couldn't, like, care. And I wanted to care, but I just couldn't care. And the other thing that bothered me too about this book was all of these random plot lines kind of started popping up with people that I didn't know. And it wasn't really presented in like a, okay, this is a new plotline that you should be interested in. It was more like just random people all of a sudden. And this is like a situation and you're like, wait, who are these people? Like, why should I care about this? Like, I don't know what's going on. You'd get to certain perspectives or point of views and you wouldn't care because they weren't presented to you in a very organic way. So you'd be like, oh, and I have to read about this group of people that I don't even know who they are. Like, why do I want to do that? So that was my biggest issue with this, was just the way that it was formatted and my personal inability to connect with the character. So another book that I DNF'd was 101 Essays That Will Change the Way You Think. So I was really excited to read this because I thought it was totally going to be up my alley. I love books that are thought-provoking, that really make you think, but it's very specific. It's a very specific type of thought-provoking. So with this, I thought it was going to be like really interesting philosophical questions, which is my favorite thing when it comes to things that make me think. Like some 40 Tales of the Afterlife is a perfect example of something that makes you think about something in a completely different way, or it poses a question that you've never thought about before and you're like, whoa, I've never thought about it before. Like, let me think about this. Like, I love stuff like that. Philosophical, theoretical ideas that you just don't think about on a regular basis. So I kind of thought that this book was going to be like that, and it definitely wasn't. This book is very much like a, this book is very much like a self-help book written by like a 25-year-old. Like, that's kind of how it feels. Like, you know those people that are married for like 3 years and they come out with a book about marriage and how to make your marriage work, and you're like, it's sort of like giving you advice or giving you things to think about, but it's already things that you've thought about before. Kind of like Tuesdays with Maury. I don't know if you guys have read that book, where he spends all this time with Maury, who's this old man, and he spends every Thursday with him. And Maury kind of like teaches him lessons and kind of tells him about his life and really gives him like these big moral things to chew on, right? But in reality, the things that Maury is telling him are all things that we've thought about before, but Maury was just posing them in kind of a different way, but you still have thought about them before. It's just things we already know. We just kind of have to put into practice, but it's hard to put into practice. So I wasn't a fan of this. It was very like shallow, wasn't posing any new questions for me, wasn't posing any new crazy cool ideas to kind of chew on and ponder, and I was just bored. So that is it for this video. Those are the only books that I can really think of that I have DNF'd. I know there's not very many on this list, and I know that a lot of people DNF a lot more often than I do, and I do want to try DNFing more often. Like this year I've already DNF'd 2, and I just feel like I'm much happier reading when I DNF, especially early on. I feel like DNFing early on is something I need to do more often. Like if I really feel like in the first couple of chapters it's just not going to be for me, to just move on to something else. And I feel like I usually know. It's very clear to me that something is bothering me or something's getting on my nerves, or it's just the writing style's not right for me. It's like when you know, you know. So when you feel that feeling, just close the book and move on to something else. So I'm going to try to do that more often, and I'll definitely try to make more of these videos in the future. But let me know if you guys had any different experiences to me with these books, or if you really loved them, or if you did feel the same, if you DNF'd them as well. I'd be very, very curious. And I also want to know in the comments below, what's the most recent book that you DNF'd and why? So yeah, that is it, and I will talk to you guys in my next video. Bye!